And we are live. Hi, everybody. Hey, hi, Brandi Wheeler and Cara Carter Gubrud. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing fantastic.
Oh my goodness, so exciting tonight to continue on talking about ghost stories and a lot of the historical things from around the United States. So, we're going to get some people in here and we are going to bring up some pictures. But first, I think, Kara, you have an announcement, and I'm going to bring up a picture for you.
Yes. Everyone, I am so super excited. My book is on Amazon and it's in hardcover, paperback, and on Kindle. So please check it out on Amazon. I'm so excited and it's got some supernatural in there. So that's oh, you don't know how I'm a published author. That's what I say.
Awesome. Congratulations, Kara.
Congratulations, Cara.
Thank you so much.
So, everybody go to Amazon, and you have three different ways that you can read this book: Kindle, hardcover, or paperback. And I believe at some point, Kara, you may have some autographed ones.
Yes, yes, I will be. At some point, I will be autographing some paperbacks and some hardcovers, and then people can actually contact me directly if they would like one of those, and we can do PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, and I can mail them their copy.
That's
That's autographed.
awesome. Awesome. That's quite a thing to, write a book and, you know, I'm clapping for you. Yay. That's fantastic. Okay, you guys, do look up her book. And if you do purchase, please go ahead and leave a review. Okay, so tonight we have jam packed, stuff going on, and so Kara, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll be ready to put up photos.
Okay, well, Brandy has a great um, ghost story dealing with one of our asylums slash, Boys Town slash, just, well, they used to call them nut houses or sanitariums or very, very eclectic names they had. But Brandy, we would love to hear your story.
Okay. So mine would take place back in the 1800s, so 1886. Picture yourself, and it's a nice, balmy summer day, mid afternoon, and you have all these people that are breaking for their lunches. And these people are type they're farmers. They've been out in the fields farming their vegetables and their fruits. And you've got the other people that's been canning all these things so that you'd have produce. And then you've also got your farm hands who've been putting animals out to their field and turning out their stalls and stuff. These people are just coming in to have their lunch. And they're sitting there these beautiful shade trees surrounded by beautiful flower pots and everything. And it sounds really nice and peaceful. You would not think that this is actually the setting of a sanatorium. So this was actually Traverse City in Michigan. And it was originally known as Michigan's State Hospital or Asylum. And it was built in 1885. Dr. James Decker Munson believed that beauty is therapy. He did not believe in straitjacket use or any of those other traditional things that other asylums were using at that time. So he believed that hard work and beauty was the best way to treat any of his patients coming in with mental disabilities. And it originally housed 43 patients, which is really small when you think about the large scale, all these other sanatoriums where you hear about them being overcrowded and not enough space or not enough staff for all the patients. This one was not that way. Eventually, they also expanded and include 12 more housing cottages and a couple of infirmaries, one for the males, one for the females. And the patients would work at their various trades and crafts, and they became a self sustained institution. So they sustained themselves within, and they also earned money for the institution with the goods that they produced. Now, you wouldn't think this sounds like a place that would be haunted. sounds idealistic, but in 1989, the facility finally closed its doors. And in 2000, they started to renovate this place for residential and commercially zoned areas. And people started coming in and seeing, sightseeing, moving into the places that were ready. And current residents and visitors nowadays claim to see ghostly apparitions that include ghosts of children running and laughing down the hallways, screams and voices echoing in rooms, and there's also claims of seeing a ghost or a chaplain, depending on your beliefs, that had supposedly hung himself in a chapel back when it was an asylum. And another thing that is often mentioned is some form of a monster figure that is seen in basement tunnels. It's never elaborated on what this monster is or what it looks like. Nobody ever elaborates on it. It's just brought up frequently. So I should also mention that this place was also used for any type, there was outbreaks of tuberculosis, diphtheria, typhoid, polio, influenza. Anytime those things were big outbreaks, people were also housed there for that. So the question, though, is where did all these ghosts come from? Because if it was such an idealistic setting where, these people were being straitjacketed or abused, why are there so many vengeful spirits hanging around there? And nowhere did it mention, specifically that children were kept at this place. So where are the children's voices coming from? It makes you wonder.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I want to know about the monster. Maybe that's shadow guys, shadow people.
Yeah.
Because nowhere do they mention shadows or shadow people. It's always they define it as a monster. But they don't define any shape for that monster, anything other than it's a monster. So it's really left up to your imagination what would you see down there. Because also when you're looking through all the historical facts of this place, nowhere does it mention anything about basement tunnels. So where did those come into play? Because they wasn't mentioned in the original, structure of this asylum. It was really like set up to be an open ground area where they had farmland. I mean, they even had a award-winning cow for like 5 years in the early 1900s. So it just makes you really question what was being done there that they did not either document or the documentation has been lost over the years.
I think it's a little crazy. When you hear kids' voices and stuff, you always think that it, could have had a children's area or something like that. But I do think that there are some evil things that do mimic children.
And that could very well be what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really feel like a lot of times when there's a haunting and people go and say, oh, there was this little child. And I'm going, man, maybe not.
Exactly.
Maybe this was something else.
Kids running up and down the hallways. They can hear them laughing and playing, but you don't see none. It's just that you can hear them.
Yes, yeah.
But nowhere was it mentioned. The only thing I can think of is maybe back when they had the outbreaks and stuff, that they used to house kids in these asylums that were not sick because their parents were in these asylums. So it makes me wonder if that's where the kids were and then they got sick too, because that stuff was highly contagious.
Right.
But I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not a historical person. I don't know for a fact.
Well, I think that it makes sense if there were kids around at all that they would get sick and they would pass away. And it is always creepy when you hear the footsteps. I bet most of the people that watch this show have had an experience, of hearing just something walking through the house or, through the kitchen or something like that.
Yeah, I would think that with the having sick children in the same wing as the children of patients, and then I would think that they would probably get typhoid or diphtheria or any of the number of illnesses that ran rampant, influenza, the scarlet fever, and possibly those kids lost their lives because they were housed with sick children instead of being in a different wing themselves.
But you know what? A lot of old buildings did have tunnels, and I was in a I worked in an historic building in the mid California area, and they were all interlocked together with these tunnels. And not everybody knew. I mean, they didn't want people knowing that. And so they took me through once, and I went underground and came up in a different building and stuff. So, it was very secretive back then because it was, a way to get fast through to the other building. But I think that it might have been built for other reasons as well. But I mean, there could be some stuff under there.
Oh, I definitely believe that. Hi, Kate.
Kate
Welcome.
was going on a trip, weren't you, Kate? From Scotland.
Yes.
Hi, Kate. Okay, are we finished with this photo?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
That was a short little. There wasn't a lot to that one because like I said, there wasn't a lot of the horror stories that come with a lot of the asylums from back then. It was pretty idealistic if you looked at it. And man, if I had to go back to one back then, I'd choose that one.
Yeah, I think the thing is when we, look at these buildings, even when people pass away, they may be not knowing they're already gone or whatever. So there's still hauntings or there's residual energy there and stuff like that. So it probably, unlike what we're going to be hearing coming up, there's true horror stories in these places.
Oh, yes. And our next story is probably the most disturbing of any of the sanitarium or reform school stories I have ever come across in my 52 years. This is shocking on several levels, especially since this place didn't even close until 11 years ago. But we're going to talk about the Dozier Reform School in Florida. And that White House, that building there, that White House, that's where a lot of the torture took place. But we'll start out with a little background on the school. The Dozier Reform School, and it was a reform school for boys, opened in 1900 and was open for 111 years. Did not close until 2011. It's located in Marianna, Florida. And the school is known around the world, or well, around the United States, I can't say world, around the United States for the abuse, torture, beatings, rapes, and even murders of the young boys and young men by members of their staff, almost like it was condoned. Governor Christ actually ordered a full investigation into the reform school in 2009, which led to finally to it being closed. And sometime around 2012, the remains of 100, they say people, but let's face it, they were 100 young boys and young men were found. And the state tried to sell the property before the bodies could be exhumed. Luckily, the family of a young boy who was murdered there in 1934 sued and they won an injunction to stop the state from being able to sell the property before those bodies were exhumed. Thank goodness. Because a few years later, in 2016, the University of South Florida issued their report, and Unfortunately, out of those 100 bodies, they were only able to positively identify 7, and then there are possible identifications on 14, and that's using DNA. Many of the surviving family members who had people go missing there, because it was always they went missing, um, and they were always told they ran away or something like that. They gave their DNA, and yet, I mean, there's so many bodies, so many children that are still missing. Um, and in 2019, even more bodies were found. And in 2019 is when 300 of the survivors came forward with their witness accounts, their first-hand stories of the abuse and the murders that happened there. Now, the survivors who did come forward, they called themselves the White House Boys, and that's where we get into the White House. Um, that is where most of the torture took place, right there in the White House. Boys would be dragged out of their beds in their dormitory and taken there, tied to the beds, and raped and beaten and tortured for no reason. There were some that actually had their skin melt off of their bodies from the amount of whips and beat and blows that they took to their legs and their backs. Um, so it's no wonder that so many did not survive. As a matter of fact, one young boy who came there in, I believe it was either 1934 or 1938, he came there, it's 1934, and within 38 days, he was dead. His family was told he ran away, but he didn't, because when their family said they were coming down with a lawyer and investigators or whatever to look for their child, all of a sudden the school said that they don't know what happened, but his body was found in a grave, or his body was found decaying by one of the buildings. He must have gotten hurt when he escaped, and that he, must have died. However, they purposely buried his body before the family could arrive. And, back then it's not like today. They get a court order and exhume the body. They didn't have that kind of thing back in the 30s. But it was later found out that young man, by an eyewitness who told the family, I was there with him, he was shot by the staff with a shotgun. And so but the abuse just stretches so far. I mean, not only were these young boys, some of these young boys were only in there for petty theft, like stealing a loaf of bread or or some of them were in there because they skipped school. They played bookie. Some of them had mental illness, uh, and should have gotten psychiatric help as opposed to being stuck in a reform school. But these young boys went in there and they came out, some of them came out monsters. Some of them came out so damaged that they didn't even want to live. But, mostly, the PTSD that must have been abundant in these children who were, like I said, they were raped, they were beaten, they were tortured, they were abused mentally, physically, emotionally, and they had some of the craziest rules that still continued up until the 70s. One of them was they had the North Side dormitory was for the black children and young men, and the South dormitory was for the white males. The white males were usually taught a trade, doing maybe mechanical things or learning, how to blow glass or different things. And the segregated black children were forced to work in the fields. I mean, and they took some of the harshest beatings. I mean, yes, the white children were beaten so badly and killed too, but um, the obviously they had that whole segregation thing still going on, and it was all the way through up until the 70s, which is which is incredibly horrifying.
It's just unbelievable, Kara, unbelievable. And that it kept going on, and how many children were murdered, without somebody stopping it. It's crazy.
They don't even know if they've even hit the tip of the iceberg with with the ground penetrating equipment. There could be other mass graves, and this doesn't even include the cemetery that's there that houses many of the children who, quote unquote, became ill and died there, and they properly, they buried them properly. I mean, we're talking, we don't know how many more mass graves are going to be found since they're still looking into things.
So the building is still standing?
Oh yes, yes, yeah. It's only been they only closed it down 11 years ago, and which is shocking that it was able to go through that. But I mean, I have to give it to Governor Christ. He started the investigation that led to it finally being closed. But survivors, there are survivors dating back who were in there in the 50s who have come forward with their horror stories and knowing some of the victims who actually died. Some of them witnessing some of the brutality and the murder. You
Well,
know,
they need justice. They need to see if these monster people are still alive, the staff.
there's several of the staff that are still alive. I think that the school is named after a former superintendent, Dozier, and it was named that, I believe, I want to say 1959, 1960. The name was changed. But I mean, this is why this reform school is considered. Yes, Kate, it is. It's very shocking. Um, this is why this is considered one of the most haunted places in Florida, with the White House there being at the top. But we'll talk about some of the hauntings, and it's sad, some of them. But there's been ghostly apparitions have been seen all around what they call the campus, and the graveyard, it seems, has a lot of lingering spirits that are seeking some kind of closure. Very, very sad, very desperate, seeking closure. It's like you could feel that, yeah, there. And on the outside of those um, the rope and the uh, little poles, that's where a lot of the mass graves were found, was outside of this. So I mean, but look, I mean, those children were buried without a proper burial. They were tortured. They maybe some of them are still reliving their torture. It's very sad. But the White House actually has it's probably the most active due to all the horrific abuse and the murder suffered there. Um, I mean, imagine, the when you walk in there, people have had the sudden, intense feeling of nausea. They couldn't get over it. Some of them until they left the building itself, but it was so intense, and there have been quite a few people who have been touched by an unseen force, and even have been pushed or like barged past some of the areas where a lot of the violent abuse took place, especially the rapes. Um, and then they've had people have seen apparitions walking the grounds close to that White House, and when they're videotaping or taking pictures, they've had huge, like brightly colored orbs that have appeared both in photos and video. and the dormitory, and I'm not sure if it was both dormitories, the black dormitory and the white dormitory, but there is a lot of activity from those that were killed in a fire there in 1814. I think it was the white dormitory that the fire took place in, but I'm not sure. Um, but 2 staff members and 6 boys died in this fire. And in that dormitory, people have heard loud, muffled screams and whispers from empty rooms. And then there's unexplained cold spots as you're walking through this dormitory. There are these unexplained cold spots that are, um, I mean, we're talking temperatures. They say it's 90 degrees in Florida, and of course it's hot in there because there's no air conditioning, you have no electricity. But you go in there, and then all of a sudden you have a 40-degree cold spot. I mean, it's just a drastic drop in temperature. Um, Objects have been seen being moved around on their own, um, and with no explanation. No one has been there, and then these objects just start moving. But there's a lot of pain associated with this place, and I don't know. I don't even know if a cleansing could help release some of the pain that these young boys suffered.
I think it's just too much.
Yeah,
Too much. This is the most horrific thing. I had never heard of it personally. And when I went and looked, because we were going to talk about it tonight, it was just totally horrific and heartbreaking. And, it just must have been suffering 24/7,
yeah,
24/7 of suffering there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I actually looked at a video. Brandi sent me a video of a survivor being interviewed, and I literally cried hearing what happened to these young boys and hearing not only of their abuse and their torture and their beatings, but them having to watch their their friends or even acquaintances.
Even family members.
Yeah, yes, the one man who gave an interview, his older brother was also in there, and they were in for ridiculous things. Nothing.
Guessing kids with skipping school and smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, yeah, and the abuse that they suffered for those transgressions that it's just crazy. They're not even they wouldn't even be viable today as a transgression. They'd be suspended from school or something. But I see so much in the pain and in their faces when they were talking. But
It
then
was heartbreaking.
yes, looking at the pictures doesn't even do it justice. And the crazy thing is, I know I haven't mentioned this yet. Some of these young boys who survived were forced to dig graves in the middle of the night. They didn't know what they were digging, but they eventually figured it out. They were digging graves for children that had been murdered in the White House or murdered somewhere on the grounds. And
They spoke of waking up in the middle of the night and somebody, one of their friends or acquaintances being dragged off and then never seeing them again. They never came back.
right.
That's just horrific. It's terrible. Now, Cara, what is the status of the building? It's, abandoned. Do people go there ghost hunting, or what's the status?
People do go there ghost hunting. But the building itself, I mean, for the state, I don't think the state has been able to sell it because they had gotten that injunction. And I think until all the bodies are exhumed and run through the DNA that they have from the survivor, from the family members, I don't think the state will be able to sell it. It's still standing, but I believe there has been some vandalism And I can imagine vandalism probably from people who are so infuriated at what has been uncovered and what was covered up for so long. I mean, the building was christened, I believe, in 1959 as the Dozer Reform School for Boys, and that name was taken from the man who ran it as superintendent. And apparently, I guess the beatings that he allowed to happen were, you know, so great for the state that the state decided to name it after him.
Oh, gee.
But I mean, there are some of the tormentors still alive, uh, and the survivors are seeking justice against them, but they're also seeking justice against the state for the torture that they endured. And I hope personally that they are able to win a huge lawsuit. I wouldn't care if it crippled the state. I don't understand for 111 years how you could allow the beatings, the torture, the abuse, the hard labor, the rapes, and the murders of young boys whose only crime was playing hooky or smoking a cigarette or stealing a loaf of bread or stealing a thing of candy.
Well, also, they sent orphans there.
Yes, they
So
did.
they hadn't even committed a crime. They just had nowhere else to go, so they sent them there.
That's true. They did. If a mother died and the father was already dead, or the father, wasn't there, or if both parents were killed at the same time, an accident, and they didn't have any place to place the children, maybe the orphanage was full, or they didn't have a family that would take them in, they would dump them. They would dump them there. The boys would be dumped there.
That's horrible. They're the most vulnerable. Nobody to check up on them.
Yeah, it boggles the mind on how this could still be taking place. Less than a decade ago.
And this is not just one child. This is 100 plus children. I mean, it's just horrific. It's terrible. People have to pay. People need to know about this story because we need to really make sure that we're following our children. The children belong to us that are in foster care and orphan. They belong to everybody. And we need to make sure that they're cared for, they're protected, and they come out, being able to take care of themselves and be happy. This was the biggest nightmare ever. And I can see that this property will never, ever going to be settled. I hope it becomes a memorial and very respectfully, maintained and taken care of. And the story's told because we need to make sure that we don't repeat history, and yet we keep doing it. But when something like this and its children, we can't repeat history. We need to have social workers, we need to have people that are following these kids. And it was a big fail for Florida, a big fail for that county, and they need to make it right in whatever way they can. They're never going to make it right, but they need to make sure that this is taken care of, and this property is taken care of the right way.
Yeah, this. I mean, they had first called this the Florida Industrial School for Boys, which is an oxymoron because it wasn't an industrial school. I mean, they used these children, and they have found that these children, some of them were kept there longer because they needed the slave labor. Children that should have been released a long time, were kept there for years. And like I said, the one that just got me was, there was a 13-year-old boy, and I mentioned, he had one transgression, and it was trespassing, and I think it was trespassing to get food. But he was only there for 38 days. And his mother she was told that he ran away, and then they got him back, and then he ran away a second time, and they hadn't been able to find him, and this devastated her. She knew her son, and she was not going to listen to their lies, and a lot of parents did. And some of the children who died were actually orphans who didn't have a family to say, hey, where's our child? It's a devastating story that needs to be told.
Cara, they were all unmarked graves. So did they go ahead and they've got graves here in this cemetery? I saw that they're all made out of like pipe, be it PVC or metal. They're just pipe, nothing special, just
Yeah,
ordinary. I
yeah,
think that's horrific.
their graves were basically paupers' graves, and then the
Yeah.
mass graves were even worse, where they dumped in, mass amounts of children at the same time.
I could not show tonight the graves that were dug.
Yeah,
All those photos are on there, and I opted for this one
yeah,
because to see the large field and the rectangles dug out where they were taking out, the bodies was just too much. And I said, oh, I just can't do that. And this, I'm outraged, and I hope that maybe some people in Florida get a hold of this and go after this and just say, the people that did this, it needs to be called out. And I'm sure that the people that were survivors will be able to name some names, and they need to make sure that this history shows who did this.
yeah, exactly. But
Just
uh,
horrible.
it is. But I'm glad that we brought it up uh, tonight. I mean,
Absolutely.
our next one is not as horrific. I mean, it's it's more sad. Um, except, prior to 1916 is where there was a little hinky stuff. But we're going to talk about the Ashmore Estates that's here in Illinois. And the property itself dates back to the 1850s. It was an almshouse, for poor and also mentally challenged people. Um, but the building started going into disrepair in the early 1900s, and the in 1916 they built what is now the Ashmore Estates, and it was part of the Coles County, poorhouse, and they operated until 1959. Um, and then they used it after that, they used it as a home for disabled and mentally ill people until, 1986. Um, and then it kind of stood abandoned for a while. But the interesting thing is in 1968, it housed 49 residents, 10 of them being there just because they had epilepsy.
Right. Correct.
But that's 1968. You
Mhm.
know, even, I mean, that's not, I mean, I was born 2 years later. It's 54 years ago. They still had people in there just for epilepsy. Um, but in 1990, they tried to reopen it as a mental health facility for teen boys who were in the juvenile justice system. And that fell through. Um, I think the people surrounding it who lived there in the area, it really put the kibosh on that by, not protesting, but being highly against it and voicing their concerns. Um, and then in 1985, a mysterious fire destroyed several of the outbuildings on the property. And a couple years later, Arthur Cole, my Sorry, my tooth is going to do this to me. Cole Klesher bought the entire property for $12,500 in 1998. Is that crazy?
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
especially considering how big it is. And he intended to do the renovations to make it his own home, his private home. But vandals, constant vandals to the property, kept him from being able to renovate it and have it as his dream home. So he decided in 2006 he was going to sell it to the Kelly family, and they bought it and started doing a lot of the reno. It took them, gosh, it was like 40-hour weeks for several weeks just to clean out the place and start to try and replace some of the windows and things. But they were still getting vandalized. So the Kelly family, moved into a home on the property so that they were right there to try and stop the vandalism. And then to pay for some of the renos, they did something ingenious. They had these flashlight tours, and even in starting in October of 2006, they started having haunted house. They created a haunted house for the area to bring in money. And then they even did something that I probably would do. They had overnight stays that featured speakers, it featured watching movies, and they even had psychics there. And this was going well for them. I mean, they had this going, and they were doing renovations until 2013. A huge storm with 100-mile-an-hour winds, a tornado. If people know anything about the Midwest, we are Tornado Alley. A tornado ripped the entire roof off of this huge structure.
Oh.
It did not damage the house that the family lived in itself, but it damaged the big giant target, the building. And they just could not do the extensive repairs from the damage that was done. So they put it up for sale in 2013, and they sold it for $12,700.
Yeah.
So $200 they made off of it. And then in less than a year later, in 2014, do not know why, but it was sold again for an undisclosed amount. And the new owners are their plan is to preserve it as a historical structure, because there were at least 250 residents who passed through the Ashmore Estates, or, the almshouse. And 32 of them died there.
Oh.
Yeah, 32 of them died there. And there are a lot of legends associated with the Ashmore Estates. They kind of abound. Boards have been seen flying through the air, just out of nowhere. No one's around. A board goes flying and whipping down through a room or through a hallway.
Oh, man.
Yeah. This part scares me because people have literally been chased up the stairs, and there's loud thumps that are heard throughout the place. But can you imagine being chased upstairs in your own home or your own abode?
I don't run. I've watched a lot of paranormal shows, and they run from it, and I'm the one screaming, "Run at it!" That's what you're here for. Run at it. So
Yeah.
for me, I wouldn't, but I think the majority of people would be taken off.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. By an unseen force, my butt would be taking off. If something was chasing me, yes.
Oh,
But,
they can push you down the stairs. They can do all kinds of stuff.
oh yeah, and that's the scary part. You're chasing me up the stairs. You're gonna knock me down when I get up to the top. I mean,
Yeah, it's not good.
but they have had. They also have a lot of shadow figures near windows.
Yeah.
You know how I am with my shadow figures. But there's an apparition of a child, and they believe it's probably Elva Skinner, who
Oh.
died in a fire in um, the older building, but on the property. The older building in the 1880s.
Hmm.
And she, um, it's very sad. A young child who was burned alive, basically. Um, and then they've also had, and a lot of the deaths have been tragic too. Like an apparition of their former groundskeeper, Joe Bluxy, and I can't pronounce that. He was struck by a train nearby, and his ghost seems to wander there or linger there. So apparitions of him have been seen, and then there's one of someone by the name of Ardale that is seen, wandering there. And a lot of the supernatural things that have been felt by people is a lot of people being touched. And
Yeah.
the one of the most disturbing things I think that I um, can't even imagine. I can't even fathom. I think it would really bother me, especially dealing with a suicide. But people have actually seen the apparition of a doctor who jumped to his death from the building.
Oh, gee.
And I'm not sure it. I'm not clear if they see him jumping or if they just see his apparition. Uh,
Hmm.
but that would be pretty devastating if I was doing a paranormal investigation and I literally saw a body falling from the building or jumping from the building. I think that would be heart wrenching if he has to relive that moment. You
I
know,
had a young man on a 4-story building that was a jumper. I just turned around and I said, "We have a jumper," because it's a long time ago, And he did jump off and went down. And the other medium says, by the way, there was a dark shadow that came up and grabbed him and pulled him over.
oh
Because anything evil is going to egg him on and help him. As much as the guy, come here, come on, you can do it. Life's not worth living or whatever, and help him out. When we have there was considerable deaths there, and you have apparitions, and you have a lot of paranormal stuff going on. That stuff can just get bigger and bigger, and the more people kind of go and get scared and whatever, it does build up that energy. People want to go get scared and they want to have a good time. It's fun or whatever, but they tend to make things a little bit worse. They can really make some spirits angry that they come into. You've all seen the taunting on the paranormal shows, right?
yes,
Where they tell them you are, you could, and they really want to make the spirit do something because I'm going to just this blanket thing. If you think that you can go out and get paranormal evidence easy when you go somewhere, you are sorely wrong. It takes a lot, and they may have to be there for days to get something. You'll watch it, and the ball will move like this, and they all go, yeah, that's nothing. I've seen things flying and floating and shaking and all of that before. But it has to be an ideal thing. You got a camera, and the stuff happens. So, but the more that the people taunt and they make things angry, the worst things happen, and they're still going to be mad when the people go home. So there can be a lot of stuff happening. When you talk about touching, you will see that mostly they like to pull on the hair, touch a shoulder. You're going to get that. Sometimes touch the arm. You rarely get anything else unless it's a scratch. But it's unsettling for people to have that happen. So when I go paranormal investigating, my hair is tight up here, so that there's no pulling on me going one way or another. But the fact is that, the people that go with me, I tell them expect to be touched. And about the time that we leave, we're walking to go to our cars. They're going to get tapped or hair pulled or something like that. So there's a lot going on here. And I really apologize. I didn't have a picture ready for it. And I'm going to go
Oh,
look it up
yeah,
because I think it's going to be super interesting thing. Maybe I want to go there.
yeah, and and they're well. I would. I don't think I'd have a problem with being touched there or anything, or even be whispered to, or you're even hearing the cries. But like I said, my biggest thing is being chased up the stairs. I would panic because I would think, are they going to knock me down when I get up there? Um, and there's also an interesting apparition that has been seen countless times, to where it's a man with a black top hat. So obviously he's from way back, but it's I wouldn't mind going and investigating. I just don't want to be chased up the stairs. Or, would I be able to stand there if they tried to chase me up the stairs and face them, and not
Look
go up
at
the stairs?
You get a little spray bottle, and you can make your own holy water. You can also go get some at a church. They don't like that, and you can just yell at them and tell them to cut it out.
Yeah,
Okay, depends on the how high and how strong it is, but they'll go, oh, okay, back off.
yeah. I don't think anybody's been actually hurt here by any of the entities or spirits, but I think that the spirits have tried to either scare them off or kind of herd them up to the upstairs. Maybe there's a reason they chase them
Yeah.
up the stairs.
Yep.
Maybe something happened up there.
Right.
They want to tell their story.
Mhm.
That would be something that I would flat out ask. Do you want me to go upstairs for a reason?
Yeah. I
That
bet you that's right. I think you're right on with that too. Show this is where I was, this is where I died or got sick or got hurt or whatever. This is where I saw something. And they tend to think that we're going to see it. But most of the time, if a person's not sensitive, they're not going to see it. They can experience, the wind and the touching and the scratching and, the sounds.
yeah. Brandy, what's your take on it? How would you feel about investigating, or how would you feel if you were being herded up a staircase?
I think it'd take a lot of spirits to herd my big butt up a staircase because I'll go at my own pace. But I agree that I think there's something going on up there that they're wanting attention drawn to. Be it
Mhm.
that they want your attention there they want their story told, or they want you up there for another reason that might not be near as positive of that. Just, you've already got the story of the one physician or doctor jumping. So why are they wanting you to go up even higher? Would be my question. But I'd be willing to go up there and investigate. I mean, it takes a
Yeah.
lot to scare me off.
Yeah, me too. I don't get scared. I like to go see what's going on. I don't know that maybe that I ever said let's exit or anything like that. If there was a lot of negative activity, I would probably pull the people out. And I've had things where the people last 10 minutes and they're gone. They're at their car. They're going. That was enough for them. So,
I think out of the three stories tonight, the only one I would really hesitate on would be going to that dozier. I would
Yes.
hate to feel that another one.
that's got to be so sad and everything. Just terrible.
Yeah, because there can't be any positive energy there at
Yeah.
all. It all has to be negative
No.
and hurt
Yeah.
and pain, and I would just hate to feel that.
Yeah, scary
Yeah.
stuff, very scared feelings and stuff. Well, I go to cemeteries and I'm an ordained minister, so I'll clear grief and fears and things like that. And I tend to do it to the teenagers and, first and where I know that there's been parents that have cried there or whatever, and I'll clear that out. When you think of that school, that boys reformatory, I feel like that would be impossible. I honestly think it would be impossible. There's a lot there. It takes a lot for me to go into a place and say, move. And I probably said it a couple of times, but it would have to be something that I know is not going to budge. And
Yeah.
there's just too much horrific stuff. And a memorial would, to me, would be so great that people go and they see this, like the Holocaust museums and these different things, memorial, 9/11, whatever. They need to go there. This happened. How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, I
And
don't
this
know
is
if
so
Karen
bad.
mentioned it, but the White House boys, the group, they did go back and they have put a memorial plaque up on the White House
I
that
Oh,
completely
good.
recognizes the
yes,
lost lives of the boys and all the suffering.
yes.
Oh,
I completely forgot about the memorial that they did. Yeah,
Yeah,
their
so
strength in
yeah.
numbers. They have really come together. Some of them didn't know each other. They were there at different times in different decades, but they've all come together in this unified. This has to change. Someone needs to be held accountable for what happened to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I would, if there was a campaign to push that those people are, found and investigated thoroughly and taken care of, I'd be right there.
Yeah,
I would help.
I,
This
I
is terrible.
yeah, I could not go there. I think we've discussed before that I'm just realizing that all the things I go through in life, I'm an empath.
Yeah.
I don't think my body could literally take the amount of pain and anguish there. I don't. I think it would be devastating to my own health. I would be afraid to go there and try and feel their pain. I think it would be
Yeah.
very devastating.
I would
I've,
not imagine how hard that would be for an empath in that place. It would have to be
yeah.
horrific for them.
Yeah. I've seen empaths just on the ground crying and stuff. And I'm like, really, like, this isn't your thing. Don't put yourself into this, because you really are taking on all these things that happened, and there would be just gigantic. I would be okay, but as a mom, it would just, like, rip my heart out.
Yeah,
It would, the injustice and everything. But those type of things are the things that need to be spoken about. They need to be taught and showed that this thing happened. Let's not make any more mistakes. Let's take care of our children. And when we look at their transgressions of taking bread or whatever, and they're lost their lives over it, it's just like, that person didn't live their full life and go on to do great things. It's just so terrible. But the monsters, and they are monsters that did this, or anybody that went along with it, need to come, if they still are living, be put up in front of a judge and sentenced.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. A lot of them, if it wasn't, unless murder does never has a statute of limitations. But some of the other abuse that took place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, some of the rapes and the beatings and stuff, unfortunately, it's past the statute of limitations. However, a lot of them do have recourse because they can go through the federal court system and they can file a lawsuit saying that
Right.
their constitutional rights were denied and all these different they can go through that route and they can go through the torture and everything through the federal court system, and they probably have better luck because a federal court judge is going to look at what happened to them in a completely different light than a local judge.
yeah.
I just think they need to all have it be public, what they did, because they didn't stop there. They did not stop when that closed.
No.
I'm
Yeah,
sure that they had, prey, and that they were predators for many, many years.
To be
oh
able
yeah,
to
So,
do that on that large of a scale, they had to get some sense of empowerment, enjoyment, something from doing those acts.
and they
It wasn't
all
something they,
knew. They all knew about it.
yeah,
oh
Every
yeah,
staff member had to know about this.
yep.
exactly.
I
And if
hope
they go ahead.
I just hope that they are pushed to do it. A lot of times the squeaky wheel, gets the grease, right? That
Yeah.
you speak out enough, they're going to take care of it. And they don't need to have this under the rug still. This needs to come out. Rug needs to go up.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
Wow, Cara, this was fantastic in uh, that are bringing this out to light, and it needed to be there. It doesn't need to be in the darkness anymore. And those people, the survivors, should get something. You know, what do? We can't heal it, but maybe we could. Maybe money and memorial and all this stuff. I really, really hope that comes for
Yeah.
them.
Oh, me too.
Something. My goodness. That was a hard one tonight. So next Saturday, what do we have in store for us, Cara?
Well, these three were so powerful that we didn't get to the reform school, to some of the other reform schools, including the one in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And there was another asylum that is also devastating, and that's they had the tuberculosis and typhoid epidemics, and the tunnel system uh, going through and carrying bodies down the tunnel system.
Ooh.
Yeah, but also they didn't want the morale of the people who were also sick. They didn't want them seeing the bodies being carried out, but there was a lot of bodies. So they used a tunnel system that they originally had in there to bring carts up with supplies, and they just reversed it and started bringing bodies out for mass burials.
Oh
So
my
we
gosh.
we have a couple of those next week that are going to be really good and really spooky with and a lot of different ghost shows, and paranormal groups have done a lot of investigations there, and there's a lot of things that they've felt, learned, seen. So
Hmm.
that's gonna be our next week. We're gonna continue with our spooky asylums.
All right. Well, it's time for us to go. And so we're going to sign off. And Brandi Wheeler, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your ghost story with everybody.
Not a problem. Anytime y'all need me.
Oh, every week.
Absolutely.
Every
Yes,
week.
Every week.
yes, we can have you come and just recount some of the spookiest things. Good night,
Uh,
Kate.
Good night, Kate. Okay, you guys, we are going to sign off now, and we'll see you next week and same time. And thank you, guys. You're everything to watch us, and we really appreciate it.
Oh,
And okay,
absolutely.
guys, girls, stay here, and then we're going to sign off now. Bye bye, everybody.